Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Family Crucible, The Intense Experience of Family Therapy by Augustus Y. Napier, Ph.D., with Carl A. Whitaker, M.D. Narrated by Derek Shoales. Forward. I began this book when I was in the last stages of training with Carl Whitaker, family therapist and professor of psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin. I came to the psychiatry department both to study with Carl and to complete an internship, the last requirement for a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the University of North Carolina. Family therapy had become my major interest during graduate school, and I was fortunate to find an internship where I could study with such a skilled and widely respected family therapist. A postdoctoral fellowship allowed me to continue the training for a second year, and Carl's generosity extended my apprenticeship through 2 years of more informal work. Like many medical schools, Wisconsin honors an old tradition which encourages the medical professor to maintain a small private practice, which keeps him abreast of the difficulties of practicing what he teaches. Carl also uses his private practice directly as a teaching medium. Though I attended many seminars and received supervision of my own cases, my most valuable training was in being Carl's co-therapist with a number of families in his private practice. Out of that experience came the impetus for this book. Those interviews were powerful events for me. Some of the sense of power derived from Carl's clinical skill and from his personal force. Some of it came from the family's impressive struggle to change its own destiny. Some of it seemed to come out of our teaming as co-therapists. I knew that there was a great deal of interest in family therapy among professionals, but little awareness of this exciting new field among laypersons. I wanted to document some of the changes in families that I had witnessed during my training. In the beginning, I went over audio tapes of interviews that Carl and I had conducted together, and I studied videotapes of consultation interviews that he had led in various training institutes. Digging into these interviews was fascinating, but it was also frustrating. I quickly became enmeshed in a nightmare of complexity as I tried to describe the nuances of voice, the peculiarities of phrasing, the intricate sequence of events in the interviews. I wrote 50 pages about a single hour of therapy and felt that I had treated the material superficially. So focused was I on details that I lost all sense of the flow and the drama of family therapy. I decided to step back from the material and try to capture the feel of family therapy. Choosing a family whose treatment had been recorded on audio tape and which I had studied carefully, I began to write from memory, drawing in episodes from other cases as they seemed useful to illustrate the process of therapy. I added paragraphs and chapters of explanation to clarify both this case and the larger family therapy approach. While every major episode of the Bryce's therapy is based on an actual occurrence, their story is truly a composite of various families' experiences in therapy, and is therefore a fictionalized account. Nevertheless, I think the result is a more accurate portrayal of family therapy than was my earlier presentation of the facts. The book went with me through a number of experiences. As my own career developed, I shifted from being Carl's student to being his friend and colleague. I found that in my own private practice, I began to develop ideas about family therapy that were somewhat different from Carl's, and while my separate views have only served to enrich our association, the book had to change as I changed. By injecting more of my own view of family therapy into this book, I may have failed to render an accurate portrayal of Carl's subtle and indirect artistry. Those who know his work well may feel that I did not capture fully his skillful use of paradox, metaphor, and humor. This omission is the inevitable consequence of the writer seeing the world through his own eyes. When Carl talks to the family, he sometimes speaks the language of the unconscious mind. I tend to speak to the conscious mind and to teach. Fortunately or unfortunately, the language here is predominantly mine. Although I conceived the idea of the book and did all the writing, I had a great deal of assistance from several people. Carl's ideas formed the real basis for this book. He also collaborated closely with me as I wrote. We outlined the conceptual chapters together, and he offered many helpful suggestions as the book was revised. Ann Harris, my editor, has been a major contributor to this effort. Her warm, buoyant voice sustained me through periods of discouragement, and her extremely perceptive commentary taught me about much more than the technicalities of writing. Like a good therapist, she not only counseled me to be true to myself, but helped me see more clearly what is natural for me. Anne labored longer and harder over this manuscript than I ever imagined an editor doing, and I am grateful to her. A number of people read the manuscript and offered useful suggestions. Among them, my wife, Margaret, my students, and David Keith, a family therapist who was both Carl's and my close associate. Finally, my thanks to Cindy Hackett and the other secretaries in the psychiatry department who spent so many hours typing and retyping this manuscript. They were this book's first readers, and their enthusiasm for what they were typing was very welcome. Chapter 1. The Question of Structure. "Would you like to see a new family with me?" Carl said. The voice on the telephone was that of my present colleague and former teacher, and he sounded less casual and confident than usual. "A father who's a VIP lawyer, an angry mother, and a teenage daughter who sounds stormy as hell." His invitation sounded a little like a friendly dare. "Sure," I said instantly. "When?" Usually I would think carefully before agreeing to be someone's co-therapist, but not when the person asking was Carl Whitaker. We found a joint opening later in the week. "I'll check with the family," Carl promised. He was about to hang up when I asked, "Anything I should know before we begin?" Carl was obviously in a hurry. "Nothing except that the situation is very tense. The family was referred by a child psychiatrist in town who says that the girl's getting worse. He's been seeing her individually. The family isn't sold on family therapy, but they say they'll all come once." "How many in the family?" I asked. 5. There's a younger brother and sister." "I'll bring my work gloves," I said amiably, letting him go. "See you Thursday." Even though the distance from my office to the psychiatry department where Carl teaches is only a couple of miles, I was late for the appointment. It was a cool, beautiful June day, and I had let the drive be a leisurely one. As I strode into Carl's office, I realized that I had unconsciously given him time to tell the family why he felt he needed a second therapist and to offer my credentials for the job. He would have mentioned that I was a psychologist in practice nearby and a trusted colleague. He would have talked about the power that families have and how we therapists can be more effective if we work as a team. Since the family had been referred primarily to him, the public relations effort would be helpful. I wasn't sorry for the delay. Carl introduced me to the family. "This is David and Carolyn Bryce, their daughters, Claudia and Laura. We're waiting for their son, Don." Here was that perpetually awkward moment, not knowing whether to shake hands. There was a social component in the beginning of family therapy, but there was also a professional distance. Uncertain, we wavered between the two for a fraction of a second until the father resolved it by extending his hand to me and smiling anxiously. "Glad to meet you," he said, of course not meaning it. Still, he looked genial enough. A tall, square-shouldered man wearing glasses. He looked directly at me, a sharp, perceptive gaze, yet at the same time he seemed to recoil, as if he thought he might be hurt. He seemed at once assertive, alert, friendly, and afraid. The hesitant posture, the baggy tweeds, the glasses, the keen analytic gaze, clearly his work involved the use of his intellect. His wife did not offer to shake hands. A slight woman, almost pretty, she looked depressed. Like her husband, she had dark curly hair. She wore an expensive tailored suit of natural linen, a bright red scarf flaring out of the edge of the neat collar, and a silver pin curled sinuously on her jacket. I sensed that she was angry as well as depressed, her smile token. The adolescent daughter smiled tightly, nodding to me, but sitting firm and unmoving. She was prettier than the mother, with the same delicate features, the same curly hair. She was very anxious and very angry. After she nodded, she looked down as if in shame, thus identifying herself as it, the reason the family was there. The other daughter, about 6, sat in Carl's miniature rocking chair, a little too big for it but pumping back and forth eagerly. "Hi," she said cheerfully. She looked like a happy, active child. The mother made a gesture in her direction to indicate that she should rock less energetically, and she slowed perceptibly. Carl's office is furnished with 2 large leather sofas that face each other across the length of the room. At one end, 3 leather upholstered chairs fill the space between them. At the other end are Carl's swivel chair, placed beside his desk, which faces into the corner, and the co-therapist chair. The seating forms a tidy rectangle. The father and adolescent daughter sat next to each other in 2 of the chairs, and the mother sat alone on one of the sofas. The youngest daughter was very near the mother in the little rocker. I noted the seating. Each daughter with one of the parents, and the parents separated. I settled in my chair, looking fondly around Carl's familiar office. It was clearly and comfortably his nest, lined with rows of bookcases, every available surface covered with memorabilia of his career. Sculptures, paintings, photographs, newspaper clippings, cartoons, posters, miscellaneous objects of art or interest, all joined together somehow by the complex pattern of a large oriental rug. Carl was sitting in his chair smoking his pipe, relaxed and waiting. In his mid-60s, he is professor of psychiatry at Wisconsin and is the department's resident family therapist. He is a solidly built man of medium height whose bearing conveys a mixture of casualness and precision, ease and alertness. He has kept the large forearms and hands shaped by his boyhood on a dairy farm, and he has also maintained the relaxed friendliness of those origins. But in the interim he has acquired a look of scholarly acuity, a subtle, worldly-wise half-smile of the person of wide experience. "So," I said to Carl, my voice relaxed, "can you tell me something about the family?" We deliberately save such briefings until the family is present. In this way, they get to know exactly what we know about them, and we establish early in therapy a principle of open communication. "Well," Carl began, hesitating slightly. I realized he was concerned about beginning without the missing son. He resumed, "Well, I'll catch you up while we wait for Dawn." A pause while he thought. "Mrs. Bryce called me last week about an appointment. She was referred by John Simons, who had seen Claudia for a couple of months." The name was familiar. Simons is a child psychiatrist in town who works mostly with adolescents. John felt things weren't getting any better, and the family apparently agreed. Another pause. Over the phone, Mrs. Bryce talked mostly about the problems between her and Claudia, how they had been fighting, how Claudia had begun running away, and how she was concerned about her on a number of counts. Mrs. Bryce felt that Claudia had had some strange ideas of late. It sounded as if the stress in the family was quite high, and Mrs. Bryce was clear that it was beginning to involve everybody. She didn't want the youngest, Laura, to be exposed to the family's struggles, but I thought we had an agreement over the telephone that everybody would come at least once. As I said to you earlier, it feels like a pretty loaded situation." Claudia glared at her mother, angry at hearing this account of the conversation. She spoke, her voice harsh and strident. "Well, I think you have some pretty damn strange ideas yourself, Mom, dear. Like I'm supposed to get to bed at sunset and be a good little 6-year-old. Her anger was so intense that it startled us. Carolyn Bryce glared back, stiffening and locking her gaze into the daughters. It was as if someone had turned on a strong electrical current that magnetized the mother and daughter, pulling them toward each other. The mother. "Well, I think some of your ideas are strange, and I am concerned." Her voice was a blend of attack and worry, and she was defensive about Carl's account of their conversation. The father looked scared, as if he knew what was coming. Mother and daughter clearly wanted to fight, but it would have been a mistake to allow them to. Carl extended his hand toward them, as if to block the current between them. His voice was firm. "Let me stop you two, because I really do want to wait for Dawn." They looked away from each other, and the moment passed. "Where is he?" I asked, turning to the mother. "I don't know," she said, sounding tired, discouraged. "A couple of days ago he said he wasn't coming. He didn't want to be in family therapy. Then this morning he said he would come. When we left, he wasn't home from his art class yet. Could we go ahead and begin? Maybe he'll come in. I left him a note to ride his bicycle over here." Carl answered as I knew he would. "I think we should wait. If we begin now, we don't have Dawn in the beginning, and I'd like to start out with us all together." There was nothing unkind about the way Carl said this, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to begin without Dawn. He added, raising his eyebrows in question, "You want to use the phone to call him? Maybe he's home by now." "Sure," the mother said, rising from the couch and striding toward Carl's desk. A tense silence while she dialed. More silence while she listened to the ringing of the phone. No answer. She sighed and sat down. "I don't know what to do now." Carl seemed unperturbed, tilting back with a creak of his desk chair, drawing on the pipe. "We have the time reserved anyway. We can wait." "I'll call the art class," the mother offered, going again to the desk. With that, everyone seemed to relax. We had apparently been anticipating sitting through an hour staring at one another and trying to make talk, and the possibility that Dawn might be at the art class offered us a moment's relief. The father spoke admiringly to Carl. "I like the tobacco. What is it?" I wondered if he wasn't unconsciously saying something else like, "I admire your firmness." While Mrs. Bryce tried several phone numbers, the casual talk continued. Claudia loosened a bit and, smiling, pointed toward the coat rack. "What are those for?" Hanging on the coat rack were 2 billy clubs, one painted pink and marked hers, and the other a longer white one, his, a present from a former patient. Carl, smiling back, "You guessed right, except I don't let people use them until I get a bigger one for me." "Oh," said Claudia, intrigued and somewhat horrified. Then Laura, chirping in her cheery little voice, "And what's that?" She was pointing to the steel abstract sculpture on Carl's wall. It had always looked to me like a billowing tree shape, but I felt like shifting the focus from Carl and his office, and I interrupted before he could tell his story about it. "It's his grandfather." The group laughed nervously, not knowing why it was funny or if in fact it was funny. I added, "And if you think it's strange looking, you should see his grandmother." This time they really laughed, and Mrs. Bryce turned from the phone to see what was so funny. When people are anxious, almost any joke will do. I smiled in Carl's direction. "I'm sorry, I interrupted your story." Carl looked a little flustered, but he grinned. "You can't wait to hear my story for the 100th time." I shrugged, and Carl began. "Well, when I bought that sculpture, my patients had a lot of associations to it. Everybody saw something different in it. But one day somebody asked me what it was, and what suddenly popped into my head was this crazy thought: it's the glued-together bones of my grandfather. And I knew right away where it came from, because I'm a soft sort of a guy, and my father was the same way. But my grandfather was this tough character who, when he got gangrene in his big toe, took a pocket knife and cut it off. He didn't need no damn doctor. Well, I figured out that I bought this sculpture because I was trying to get for myself some of that iron that was in my grandfather, some of his toughness." Even though we were still waiting for Don, therapy was well begun. We were engaged in a subtle, often predictable, and very important contest with the family about who was going to be present at the meetings. Carl and I had revealed some of what our relationship had to offer: a good-humored liking for each other, an ability to cooperate, and an insistence on remaining ourselves. I was clearly not going to be the reverential assistant to the older man. And perhaps most important, Carl had intuitively modeled some of the process of therapy for the family. By sharing insight into his own personality, he was saying by demonstration, it's important to search for your own unconscious agenda. Meanwhile, the battle over whether or not we were going to have an official meeting was becoming more serious. Don could not be found at the school where the art class was held. The mother, worried, spoke with a kind of grim insistence. "Why can't we meet now and have Don come next time?" It was my turn. "I agree with Carl. I think it would be a mistake. What we are talking about is the prospect of the family as a whole changing, and to start that process with 1/5 of the family absent would be unfair to Don, and I think unfair to you. He's part of the family, and we need him here if the family as a whole is going to change." There was an edge of toughness in my voice. Mrs. Bryce didn't give in easily. "But Don isn't the problem. The problem has to do with Claudia." Her voice was chilly, too. We were definitely having a fight. Nor was I giving in. "But you see, that's your initial definition of the problem. We assume that the problem is much more complex and much more extensive than Claudia, and the whole family just has to be involved." I hesitated, gazing with level intensity at the mother. I realized that pushing the family might mean losing them, but I knew that it had to be done. "Now, maybe you guys aren't up to this kind of major job that we're talking about. We really can't decide that for you, but it's clear to us that we need the whole family." A very large and imposing silence. "I agree," Carl said quietly, adding a final nail to the argument. The mother spoke in a soft and faintly bitter voice. "It's easy for you to say that, but as her mother I have to worry about tonight and tomorrow." Anger crept back into her words now. "I mean, I don't know what's going to happen if we go back home now, and frankly, I'm worried." Carl was losing his patience, too. "But you're missing the other side. If there is such an emergency, why didn't somebody get that message to Don to make sure he got here? Because it was perfectly plain over the phone that we couldn't meet unless the whole family was here." He backed away slightly from the tough statement, softening his words if not the position he had taken. "Or was I not clear?" "You were clear," Caroline said, resigned. "Don just didn't keep his part of the agreement." Carl smiled, easing still further away from the anger. Not as I see it, and let me try to explain. He was friendly now, but speaking with conviction. My view is that Don is not acting just for himself, but that through a very complicated unconscious process, he got elected by the family to be the one to stay home. That way the family wouldn't have to face the full electricity of this thing, and you'd find out if we really meant business about working with the whole family. Elected? She said with skepticism. I explained. Probably something in your and your husband's voices that let him know you really didn't mean it when you said he had to come. I could see her feeling cornered with the responsibility. We're not trying to blame you personally, I said. It's really the family that has the anxiety about everybody's getting together, and the family he's acting for. She looked relieved at the shift in focus. David Bryce entered the conversation with a quietly argumentative rationality. I don't really understand what you mean by all this, but how do we deal with this practically? What do we do now? We are concerned about Claudia, and I think we have reason to be. I could feel the husband-wife coalition against us, realizing that Carolyn had been fighting not just for her own view, but for a thoroughly unconscious agreement between the couple that they would keep the focus on their sick daughter. The force of concern, which both parents directed at Claudia, did not feel very loving. Under the surface of caring was a steely attack. As they talked about her, Claudia cringed. Somehow we had to get around the immediate problem of the parents' accusation that we were being professionally irresponsible by delaying the appointment. I turned to David, the father. Can you say what you're concerned about that can't wait till tomorrow? Because we can find the time to meet if it's that urgent. Are you afraid she will run away or that she's suicidal? The latter is what I'm worried about, the father said. Yes, the mother resounded softly. What a dilemma. We were being given the choice of surrendering our insistence on meeting with the whole family, or perhaps acting irresponsibly in the face of a suicide threat. With every added minute of interaction with the family, we were weakening our case for not having the interview, yet there seemed no alternative but to deal forcefully with the suicide issue. How about it? Carl said to Claudia. Are you suicidal? The girl started with the directness of the question. She looked pale and tense and very angry. I've thought about it, she said with mysterious intonations that had to be pursued. How about my question? Carl said. Are you suicidal now? Or do you think you might be tonight? The slightest of smiles crossed the girl's face, like the sudden but tiny flash of brightness that occurs when a distant car strikes a reflective angle with the sun. I don't think I'd do it. A pause. But I have thought about it. How would you do it? I asked. If the fantasy was explicit and well worked out, there was plainly greater immediate danger. I don't know, maybe sleeping pills? There doesn't seem to be any really good way. I didn't like the passivity in her voice. You still didn't answer my question about now, Carl reminded her gently. Do you think there's any danger you might kill yourself before we can meet again? No, Claudia answered firmly. Then she glanced angrily at her parents. Especially if they will leave me alone for a while. Carl turned to me. What do you think we should do? How do you see Claudia? I was momentarily surprised by his question, but it was obviously an appropriate time for a conference. Pausing as I tried to collect my thoughts, I felt exposed to the family's scrutiny. The situation called for decisive action, and Carl and I had to be together in whatever we did. Claudia seems pretty alive to me, I said. I like the fact that she's angry and fighting with her parents rather than taking the anger out on herself. I feel that Claudia is very stressed, but that suicide right now is an option that she keeps open rather than an obsession. As a fantasy, it seems very much a part of her battle with her parents, I summarized. She doesn't feel suicidal to me. Claudia seemed to brighten with the words. Carl turned back to the parents. I agree with everything that Gus said, and while I might not trust either one of us alone, I trust the stereoscopic vision. He breathed in deeply, then out, and with his long breath seemed to relax. Tell you what I think we ought to do. You guys go home and think about whether you want to be in this as a family. And if you do, call me and we'll set up a time tomorrow or Monday or even Saturday if it's absolutely necessary. The father settled the question with a move that seemed authoritative, all the more so since he had remained so hidden in the interview. I don't think we need to do that. I think we should make an appointment now. And he turned to his wife. Don't you? Yes, she said, sounding a little disconcerted, as well as relieved. Do you have an opening in the morning? We'll make one, Carl answered positively. How about you? he said to me. "You have time?" Since I had an opening at 9, Carl agreed to shift his appointment. With the decision made, everyone relaxed, and it was not until the tension began to ease that I realized how caught up in the family's battle I had been. But just as the family was getting up to leave, Carl again did something surprising. He sat down on the floor beside Laura and began to talk with her. "What do you think of all this crazy stuff?" he asked with confidential warmth. "Do you think we can all stand one another for a year or so to work this out? How about you? Can you stand it?" Laura looked at her mother for a response, and Carolyn merely smiled back. Half the group was standing, the other half sitting. Everyone was both interested in the dialogue and a little confused by it. "I don't know," the little girl said hesitantly. Then she somehow found the courage to add, "But I don't like it when they fight." "Think you and I could teach them how to love?" Carl asked. "Because I've got a feeling that you already know how. And if you and I teamed up, we might teach the rest of your family." Laura was embarrassed, but she also liked Carl and couldn't avoid smiling at him. "Maybe we should start with something easy like shaking hands. You want to shake hands?" Carl extended his hand to her, and she offered her own. "Very nice," he said. "I like that." And so the interview ended. Though Carl had not planned to sit down with Laura until it suddenly occurred to him, it was a useful moment. The family could see that in addition to strength, we could offer them warmth. Fortunately, most families do not present us with such a crisis in the first interview. But many families do engage in some form of struggle over membership at the meetings. So predictable is this challenge that we have given it a name: the battle for structure. When Carl asked Bryces to bring their whole family to therapy, everyone in the family knew intuitively what that meant. Their whole world would be exposed. All its caring, its history, its anger, its anxiety. All in one place at one time, subject to the scrutiny and invasion of a stranger. And that was too much vulnerability. With its own unconscious wisdom, the family elected Don to stay home and test the therapists. Did we really mean everybody? Would we weaken and capitulate if they didn't bring Don? They had something to gain by the strategy. If we were hesitant and unconfident in our approach to their defiance, they would know that they could not trust us with the boiling cauldron of feeling which their family contained. If we were decisive and firm, they would guess that maybe we could handle the stresses which they intuitively knew had to be brought out into the open. One way or another, they had to find out how much power we had. In the meantime, they postponed facing that mysterious electricity, that critical mass, the whole family. Perhaps they thought they could be spared what Zorba called the full catastrophe. Don, of course, had his own questions to pose. "How much do I matter?" their middle child was asking. "Will you undertake changing the whole family without me?" Every member is important. I remember one mother who said in a session, "I just don't understand it. When one member of the family is missing, we get along fine. But let the missing one just walk in the house and all hell breaks loose. I just don't understand it." It has been a long road for us as family therapists to reach an understanding of just this phenomenon, the sense of the whole, the family system. While we could have explained the theory of meeting with the whole family to the Bryces, at that anxious moment it would not have touched them. There are situations where, in the words of Franz Alexander, the voice of the intellect is too soft. The family needed to test us. They needed the experience of our being firm. As unpleasant as it was, our response must have reassured them. They knew, and we sensed, how difficult and desperate their situation was, and how tumultuous it could become. They simply had to know that we could withstand the stress if they dared to open it up. The individual psychotherapy patient comes to the therapist with an almost automatic deference, a sense of dependence and compliance. The role pattern is old and established, the dependent child seeking guidance from a parent figure. There is no such traditional image for the family, no established pattern in which an entire family submits to the guidance of an individual. And the family structure is simply too powerful and too crucial for the members to go trustingly into an experience that threatens to change the entire matrix of their relationships. If the family therapist is to acquire that initial authority figure or parent role that is so necessary if therapy is to be more powerful than an ordinary social experience, he has to earn it. Families come into therapy with their own structure and tone and rules. Their organization, their pattern has been established over years of living, and it is extremely meaningful and very painful for them.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?